Heavenly Grail. The legendary story of the Holy Grail starts in heaven with the sin of Lucifer, whose pride made him refuse to bow down to Adam and Eve after God the Father had created them. Lucifer believed he could create a better man and woman. He sat on the throne of God and claimed to be as great as God the Father. Lucifer was one of the brightest of angels, and his light was great, but it still paled next to the light of the throne of God.
The fall from heaven prefigures the fall of man from paradise. And Lucifer, an analogy for the human I am, falling from heaven into the darkness to rise up and be reunited with the Spirit of heaven, the blood of the Son of God. That is what Lucifer's Grail held. That is what is in our hearts.
When Lucifer came before the throne of God again, the archangel Michael was on the right side of God with a flaming sword of power and a spear of might. The archangel Gabriel stood on the left side of God, standing in front of the newly created human beings hiding behind the throne.
In legends, this is often forgotten, that the human being is what is being fought over in the war in heaven. We are the Holy Grail. And when we see that the right and left hand of God take on such interesting characteristics, that the one is like the rose and the other one is like the lily, one is the sword and the spear, and the other one is pure grace and birth, we get to see the real battle that happened for the soul of man, and it's still happening as we rise up to attain our spirit. And our quest is to take both inspiration from Michael and from Gabriel.
The archangel Michael struck the crown of Lucifer from his prideful head, and the central green stone of the crown was dislodged and fell like a meteorite from the presence of God.
This legend is really amazing because the king of Tyre, who was said to have everything there was, he lived on an island just off the coast of the Levant. And when this stone fell from heaven, it was brought to him, and it became his most precious of all possessions, and he had it carved into a bowl that he drank from. But when he met Solomon, he realized that Solomon was the wisest being there was, and so he gave him what is called the bowl of Tyre, or the bowl of Solomon. And this is where we get the image of the Holy Grail. But it's really an image of what Lucifer had to go through as his transformation from a prideful, egotistic being who thought that he was greater than God, greater than humans, of course, and greater than God. And it is really about the fact that fall comes after pride. As soon as you have pride, the fall can come.
When the blood of the Son of God touched the stone of Lucifer's crown, Solomon's bowl, the redemption of Lucifer began.
Now, this is a most interesting analogy because the bowl of Lucifer, this green stone, is really a reference to the heart. In the East, they refer to it as the green kutab. It is the green vessel that is the human heart. And what is happening when the blood of Christ enters into the Holy Grail, as is called in the legends, this chalice that Joseph of Arimathea held, it's really an image of the way that the blood of the divine enters into the human heart.
And Lucifer, having Jesus Christ's human divine blood pour into his jewel of the crown, emerald bowl, finally bowed before a human, Jesus of Nazareth, and recognized his sin of pride, which caused his fall from paradise.
This moment of Lucifer not being able to look at Christ on the cross, on the hill of Calvary, was a critical moment in all of human spiritual history, because it was at that moment that Lucifer still denied the fact that Christ was greater than he, and that a human who had now become the human being, Jesus of Nazareth, who then allowed the Christ to pour into him, just like we imagine the blood of the divine pouring into the vessel, the grail of our heart. At that moment, Lucifer again could not acknowledge the being of Christ. He could not acknowledge the deed of the gods. And that is why human beings became greater than Lucifer at that moment, because human beings could, out of their own free being, acknowledge that Jesus of Nazareth, yes, was the Son of God, which Lucifer could not acknowledge.
When the blood body of Christ united with the earth, humanity was given the blood of the gods that can transform the kingdom of Lucifer into the sacred Grail castle. These secrets are referred to as the mysteries of the holy blood relics and the quest for the Holy Grail.
This is so profound. Lucifer's kingdom that he fell into the darkness is the earth. And when we are on the earth and we're wandering around with the same blindness that Lucifer has, we may not find the Grail castle, though it might be right in front of us. We will be challenged then to do exactly what Lucifer had as a challenge. He could not accept the blood of Christ flowing as the ichor, the divine blood of the gods, entering into the earth and entering into the heart of all human beings. He couldn't accept that blood, even though he watched as the earth opened up with an earthquake and that the blood entered into the earth and turned the earth into a star, so that the earth, a planet, then had the capacity to transform into a sun, a star, and we as a human being transform our hearts into a sun that gives nourishment to everything around it, just like our sun does. But Lucifer still could not understand this, even though he witnessed that in his own kingdom, the blood of a god had come and entered deep into the core of the earth to transform it.
If a seeking aspirant, Grail Knight, understands the living imagination of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, he has entered the Grail castle, where the Grail maidens, the three Marys, display their devotion to the Grail and ask the important question, who does the Grail serve? Each seeker can quest for the Grail and use this way to find the entrance to the Grail castle, so they might awaken and ask the Grail question, hopefully being morally developed enough to understand the answer.
It is a cosmic truth to understand that Lucifer, when he went before the throne of God that no one could stand to witness and look at, he was actually in the Grail castle, and because of his pride he did not ask who it served. Who does this brilliant, shining light coming from the throne of God serve? He didn't ask that. He said, I want to be it. I want to be more than it. I want to sit on that throne. I want to possess it. I want to own it. I want to selfishly hold that force that should be raying out as the force of love and mercy and grace. But when it's held like Lucifer, it's light that doesn't shine out. It's non-effulgent light. It is self-contained light. It's self-absorbed pride and the other 6 deadly sins that go along with it. But when we on earth, after we go through the challenge of becoming the Grail Knight, which is, of course, emulating the deed of the Archangel Michael, who with his spear and his sword is the first soldier of God, of course, we emulate that, but we then must become like the Archangel Gabriel, the one of peace, the one that can receive the blood of Christ, that can receive the blood of the divine, our own divine blood that flows to us into our heart. That's the mission. And it all comes down to whether or not, as Lucifer or as a human being, you're going to ask the question, who does the Grail serve? The Grail does not serve you. Even when you're the Grail King, it serves others. And once you know that, as the Grail stories teach us, you bring your brother, you bring your sister with you so that they can share in it too. Because if you truly experienced the etheric force of the risen Christ, the first thing you would want to do is share it with your loved ones. And this is what happened when the Grail Knight would enter the Grail castle and see the Grail maidens who had already attained the Grail. They were the keepers of the Grail. And the Grail Queen herself was not wounded like the Grail King, who was ineffectual and who had, through his own sin, lost the greenery of all the land around him. He lived in a wasteland in that Grail castle. But the women, they didn't. They served the Grail. They received the nourishment. But when the Grail Knight comes there and can put down his sword and his spear, and they no longer become tools of defense or fighting or war or blood mysteries of war, and he can turn to the blood mysteries of consciousness brought by the Grail Maidens and the Grail Queen, then that soldier of God, that quester for the Grail, can then become, once he asks the question and brings his brother with him, who does the Grail serve? And then they know that the Grail serves everyone.
We need the sword of Michael to strike pride from our haughty heads and let the jewel of the crown become a humble, simple stone that falls into the compassion and love of the heart. We also need the fiery spear of heaven that can hold the demons and dragons at bay without killing them. We need to use the spear to keep the distance between our higher Michaelic angelic forces and the lower forces derived from the 7 deadly sins of vice and immorality.
These images are so powerful, and they're so real as tools of the Spirit that help us in our own ascension. So when we see the images from the Grail legends where the spear drips blood into a vessel, it doesn't really matter whether it's a spear or whether it's a sword, whether the vessel is a grail or a platter. What it's referring to is that when we open our hearts, as the lance of love opened the heart of Jesus Nazareth as he was on the cross, so too when we open our hearts and we pierce our own hearts with the sword or spear of Michaelic wisdom that slays ignorance and starts from the head but drops into the heart and wounds the heart so that the heart can bleed for others and not just our own Luciferic selfish pride. That is the path of the Grail. And then we can rise back up, literally up the spear of our spine into the Grail castle in our head, and there we can take our seat and carry that wisdom that we have gleaned through the suffering of the bleeding heart into the wisdom of the Grail castle, and there become the Grail King or the Grail Queen as the fulfillment of the Grail quest. And it all has to do with holy blood, whether it's the blood of Christ or our own blood, or whether we look at the ichor of the gods, the blood of the gods that has come to us, that is now as appearing in each of us as an etheric drop of blood that can then basically attune us to the rate of ascension that we should rise up into in our future state as an angel. That is what the Grail is. We are the Grail. And when our heart can become that sun, when our heart can take the pride of Lucifer and let it become humbled enough to hold the blood of each of our higher selves, our Christ selves, then we become the Grail King or Queen and reenact every single day in every truly warmed up thought that we have the entire legend of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail.
The Archangel Gabriel held back and protected 2 very special souls who would later become the vehicles for Mary and Jesus when they incarnated on the earth, the one and only time they would incarnate in a physical human body. These bodies would become the new Adam and Eve under the cross, the new tree of life.
This profound mystery is often overlooked. And even more overlooked is the fact that there was a female version of these 2 beings. In the Kabbalah, in Hebrew tradition, this being is called Adam Kadmon. And Adam Kadmon is a perfected vehicle of the human being that was held back as humans incarnated into the earth. But one being never incarnated. They stayed behind or underneath or on the throne of God, with God. And that was Adam Kadmon. But only in the Gospel of Sophia do we find the clear revelation that the female that was held back at that time was called Eve Kadmon. And she too was a perfect being who never incarnated. She was the mother of Jesus of Nazareth, the pure soul that we would call the true Immaculate Virgin. And her son had to have a perfect vehicle, one that had never been used before, one that was a perfect image of the archetype of the human being before the stain of the Garden of Eden, before the stain of original sin, the stain of Lucifer, the stain of pride, the stain of believing that you are as great as a god or greater. These two souls, Adam Kadmon and Eve Kadmon, did not have a speck of that in them. And so it is true that they were the most perfect, pure, and spiritual beings ever to incarnate, once and only once in this plane. And this is a mystery of the Archangel Gabriel. And that is why Gabriel it was who brought the lily and announced to Mary that she had the Son of God within her.
The sword of wisdom was present in the wisdom of Mary, the three Marys, who mustered the strength to endure witnessing the passion, pain, and death of Jesus, knowing that he was the Son of God. This wisdom could only be fully held in the heart of the mother of Jesus. It took both the wisdom and strength of Michael and Gabriel, combined to hold all these things in her heart. Mary was so transformed by her experience that she ascended bodily into paradise after her dormition. Wisdom became love, and the Holy Grail was attained as Mary ascended into heaven before the followers of Christ.
These mysteries are accepted by some religions and not by others, but they are certainly a picture of what the sanctified human soul becomes through ascension. And when the 12 apostles could not even be near the crucifixion, let alone have the strength to look upon it, and when no angelic being in heaven could look upon the death of the Son of God upon Calvary, except for the Archangel Michael, and when only the three Marys standing together and being there throughout the entire Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering of Christ, and receiving those blood relics from him, only one other being was able to witness that, and that is the being who Christ turned to on the cross and said, "This is your mother, mother, this is your son." That is the being we call John the Beloved, who was not one of the 12 apostles. So John the Beloved, who was Lazarus raised, he was the first person to be raised from the dead in a true mystery initiation ritual by Jesus of Nazareth. And of course his sister, Mary of Magdalene, and his other sister, Martha, were the hosts of Jesus of Nazareth. That is where he stayed in Bethany, in Jerusalem, is with them. And it was Mary, Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary Cleops, her sister, who stood under the cross to truly witness the death of a god. And they understood that's what they were witnessing. Longinus only realized it when the blood touched his eyes and he became able to see. And then his first words were, "Truly this must be the Son of God." But the three Marys understood this from even the time before he entered into Jerusalem. They were his deepest disciples. And John the Beloved, Lazarus, who has been raised, he then became the true keeper with Mary of the mysteries of the blood relics and also the mysteries of who Christ really is, not only as a human being, but as a cosmic being. Joseph of Arimathea, they never say actually looked upon Christ on the cross, and Nicodemus only came to help afterwards, along with Longinus, who was transformed through the crucifixion, when they then prepared the body for burial in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb.
Mary, the mother of Jesus, also used her body as the Holy Grail to birth the holy blood of Jesus, the purest spirit who had not incarnated in a human body before or after. Mary transformed into the living Grail whose blood became the vehicle for the divine to incarnate. Mary was overlighted by Gabriel to bring forth the most perfect human body possible.
Mary and Gabriel are the mysteries of the moon, the female mysteries of menstruation, of blood, of the mysteries of birth. Gabriel is the being who inspired Mary throughout the entire time, whereas the being Michael is the being of the sun. he represents the solo logos, Christ. They call him the face of Christ, the countenance of Christ. And it is this mixing of the forces of sun and moon that are the true mysteries of bringing the divine blood of the Son of God, the ichor, the etherized blood, into the ancient, most ancient mysteries, the female mysteries, the matriarchal mysteries of the blood, because it was those moon mysteries that were first the inspirers of calendars, of speech, of all the mysteries of birth. And with incredible reverence, the ancients looked to the woman as the true embodiment of the divine on the earth, because she could give birth. Death could come to those she gave birth to, and she could then give birth again. The woman was the seed of life. And so when we talk about the Holy Grail that continues to give out permanently through the mysteries of the blood, you're talking about the female human body of procreation that can give through birth the great mysteries of the continuation of human life on earth. These mysteries go back to the beginning of human recorded history. They go back to the very beginning of time that we would call the Garden of Eden. And it is those mysteries of the male and the female that really brought to life the knowledge that came from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so many times we see that the snake, Lucifer, whispers first into the ear of Eve, according to the Chaldean stories that were then transformed into the Mosaic stories of the Hebrews. But that was actually an indication that the woman was wise and that she could actually hear the language of the Spirit. And woman, the moment that she left the Garden of Eden, was cursed with the blood mysteries that come every single month, that without, humanity could not go on.
The archangel Michael was said to be the only angelic hierarchy who could bear to witness the crucifixion and death of the Son of God. It was Michael who guided the hand of Longinus to pierce the heart of Jesus with his spear. It was a merciful and loving deed that he did to open the heart of a God to bleed for all humanity's redemption.
So many times, people see the spear of Longinus as something of a tool of evil, perhaps, that has to do with power on the earth, because it was much later, by Charlemagne, Pippin, and the great German Frankish leaders, carried on in a tradition that if you held the spear, you ruled the destiny of the world. But in fact, it's the exact opposite. The spear of Longinus is a spear of mercy and love. It's a spear of humility. It's a spear that again and again makes the willing sacrifice by Christ of his human body, which is then given as a sacrifice along with his human blood, continuously in the mysteries of the Holy Eucharist and the mysteries of communion that are spread throughout many Christian churches. It is a transformation of those elements. It is an absolute ascension of these very products that are considered to be the Holy Grail. And in modern times, when a human being looks at the Holy Eucharist, it is a reenactment in our soul of the analogy of the ascension of the soul into the Spirit. It is both physical, it is also an analogy, it is also a metaphor, it is an image, but more so than that, it is also the process of physical ascension from the human body into the spiritual body.